Yo thought I was done? Nah, son! I may have gone too far in a few places and not far enough in others, but y'all ain't ready for this video. I'm about to go off. You don't even know. You guys certainly had a lot to say about my Defending Ash Ketchum video. There were certainly the generic Ash sucks people in there who didn't even pay attention to what was said, but those people were inevitable anyways. But I did notice a lot of genuinely good arguments. A lot of them I knew going into part 1, but I cut a lot of stuff out for time, so I didn't go as in-depth as I would have liked to on some things, or just didn't know how to put some of it into words. But now I do. And I'm ready to respond. Go watch part 1 if you haven't already and read some of the comments, then come back and watch this video, or else a lot of it's not going to make sense. Today, I'm going to be looking at what I got wrong and elaborating on what I feel was misunderstood or places I misspoke, and basically responding to the common arguments used to discredit that video, as well as some new arguments that I feel complement the old ones. I'm the kind of guy who has a response for everything, so I'll be going in depth with the major points only. And just a disclaimer, know the difference between in-universe and out-of-universe explanations, because I find that people either confuse the two or disregard one or the other. But with all that out of the way, let's get weird, let's get wild, and let's get back in to Defending Ash Ketchum.
Who's that Pokemon?
It's Pikachu!
It's Clefairy!
Fuck!
So, before we get into the big points, I first wanted to clear up some of the minor points that were incorrect from the original video, or things that supposedly proved me wrong, but actually don't. The first one is a little inconsequential, but I pointed out how Ash's Krokorok came after the Univol League, and that was wrong, but it actually happens to help my case from part 1. I thought that he came after the Univol League because of the way I rewatched Black and White on the Twitch marathon months ago, because they looped episodes in a way that made it seem like he was caught after. My fault, but it's not really a big deal. Secondly, I definitely miscounted the pity badges in part 1. Brock was most certainly a pity badge because Ash literally forfeited the match and didn't win, but Brock gave him the badge anyways. The rest of his original 8, I still stand by what I said about them, but I still think the Earth badge was legit. Giovanni literally left Jesse and James in charge of the gym, so they were effectively the gym leaders for the time being, meaning that they had the authority to take challengers and give them badges. Ash beat them in battle, so he earned the badge. A lot of his pity badges are more to show the audience that even if you aren't the absolute best, that there are other ways to prove your worth, like when Ash saves Erica's gloom from the fire. But in the end, if the gym leader deems him worthy of the badge, then he's worthy of the badge. Unless you're the Cerulean sisters who just give them away, that is. Again, my point when explaining the pity badges in part 1 was to show that Ash had what we would consider illegitimate badges, so he wasn't very strong by the Indigo League because he didn't actually finish half the battles against the strongest trainers of the region. Not saying they made him good, just not as bad as people make him out to be. Next, in the original video, I said that you can't command Pokemon to evolve in the anime, and this is still true, but there are actually 2 examples of this happening. The first instance is in Ash's first battle against Sabrina, where she seemingly uses her psychic powers to command her Abra to evolve, but this seems to be the exception rather than the rule. Sabrina has psychic abilities, while Ash and every other trainer do not, so this was probably some form of psychic mumbo-jumbo that only applies to her. The second instance of trainers commanding a Pokemon to evolve was in a filler episode in Sinnoh in a dream sequence. If you can't figure out why this one doesn't prove anything, then there's no hope for you. It's a dream/illusion and therefore not indicative of reality. Another criticism that I got was that I didn't include the Battle Frontier in my original breakdown of Ash's progression, and the reason for that is that the Battle Frontier isn't a Pokemon League. That's not to say that he didn't do some cool stuff in that section of the story. In fact, some of his most impressive battles were against the Frontier Brains, but we were talking about league placements in part 1, not side events or whatever you'd consider the Battle Frontier to be. Him winning the Battle Frontier and Orange League are often used as examples for how Ash can win leagues and still continue traveling, attempting to debunk my whole video, but at no point did I say that him winning means he becomes a Pokemon Master and has to stop traveling. I said that winning a league is one major step closer to becoming a Pokemon Master, and therefore closer to his journey ending, just based on what's been said in the show in the past. He can win leagues and still travel. I never said that he couldn't, but once he wins, it sets a precedent for every future league. He can't do worse and lose the next league after winning one, because that's just not very good writing. Black and White being a prime example of where he placed worse than he had in the past and nobody was happy with it. This is why if Ash wins the Alola League, which so far it's looking like he probably will, then he's gonna lose to the Masked Royal to give him a reason to keep traveling and to not be champion. And I think Galar and future generations after that are gonna take a similar approach. They'll continue to make the leagues work differently than what we're used to in Kanto through Kalos, so that Ash can win them, but not become champion and still travel to the next region. The writers aren't as inept as some internet commenters who have no no clue how making a show works will make them out to be. They've been making the show for over 20 years, assuming it's even the same people anymore, and they're always thinking of the future, even if they don't say so in interviews. This "the writers want him to lose" argument is bogus, as they have officially stated otherwise, and claiming, "but my marketing," as an example for the anime continuing is a cop-out too, because of how glaringly obvious that is. The show being basically a 20-year-long commercial doesn't mean that the writing can't be good or that Ash can't win. In fact, Pokemon has never been the epitome of what we would collectively consider good writing, but what they've been doing has been proven to work, because they're still going and people of all ages still eat it up. If you came to Pokemon expecting great plot lines, complex characters, and accurate power scaling for every fight, then you've come to the wrong show, and you're probably watching Pokemon for the wrong reasons, because you're certainly not going to find any of that here. Their focus when making the anime seems to be, make it cool, with everything else being an afterthought. That's what I expect when I see Pokemon, and that's why I enjoy it, because I know what to expect. I don't set the bar too high for a show that never had that high of a bar to begin with, and I think more people should recognize that. The bar was never set very high. People just remember it being higher than it was from when they were kids. Pokemon is like a mediocre slice of pizza. It's not exactly what you wanted or what you expected, but it's fine for what it is. It's, kinda hard to completely mess up. Next isn't really an argument against my video, but I see it all the time in the Pokemon anime community, and it's this idea that Ash needs to be replaced by a new protagonist. Simple fact is that won't happen unless Rika Matsumoto quits voicing him or God forbid something bad happens to her. Ash is too recognizable of a character to just replace like that, and they'd be taking a big risk by replacing him. Sure, shows like Yu-Gi-Oh! And Digimon have done it, but not every show needs to. It's one of those ideas that's not bad per se, it's good on paper, but simply won't happen because of real-world factors. Pokemon works best when they target your nostalgia, so if they were to replace Ash, then less people would care because he's not who they remember. Plus, his story ending doesn't nullify the fact that his entire journey has been kind of up and down and a lot of pretty bogus things have happened to him so far. In regards to my comments on Ash's competency in Kalos, those were vastly misinterpreted. I never said that he's not competent in X and Y, because that'd be stupid. His battle style and general attitude was way more serious than in previous series, and he was clearly very skilled at battling. My point was that he's not as competent as you think he is. Not that he's completely inept. Words mean things, so listen to them. At his core, Ash is still the same dumb, goofy kid who left Pallet Town, but the difference is that now he just has a lot more experience in Pokemon battles, and X and Y is very indicative of that. Additionally, people constantly wonder why Ash never calls in his old Pokemon for help anymore, and the answer is quite simple. He wants to challenge himself. If he just used his old Pokemon for every tournament, then that'd be too easy for him because they've had more experience than his current team does. He wants to win a Regions League with the Pokemon he befriended in that region. It's the same reason you can't just transfer your old mons to the new game at the start, because they want you to use the new guys. And of course they throw in some old guys for familiarity's sake. Narratively speaking, his current team wouldn't get their time to shine if even half the spotlight is being hogged by fan service Pokemon for nostalgia's sake. What would be the point of building a whole new team of new Pokemon for a whole region if he's just gonna use his old ones? Sinnoh has demonstrated that it's possible for him to use a mix of new and old, and I'm not saying that he can't, but at this point where he has so many old Pokemon, you'd have to either give screen time to all of them or none of them. Point is, using his old Pokemon diminishes the growth of his current team that he worked so hard to train. Their training means significantly less when he benches them for a blast from the past just for the sake of it. Some people also pointed out how Meltan and Poipole aren't legendaries, and that's also wrong. Ultra Beasts are considered as sub-legendaries in the game's code, much like the legendary birds or the Reggies. Ultra Beasts are weird because outside the games they're sometimes treated as legendaries, sometimes not, but if they are in the games, then they are in the anime. That might seem contradictory later on in the video, but sometimes the games do speak for the anime, and this is one such instance. When it comes to mythicals, they're like thumbs. You know how all thumbs are fingers, but not all fingers are thumbs? Well, all mythicals are legendary, but not all legendaries are mythical. Something like Palkia, for example, is a legendary, but it's not mythical. Whereas Meltan is mythical, and therefore legendary. Mythicals are just a subcategory of legendaries, so you literally can't be a mythical and not be a legendary. You have to be both if you're a mythical. And even if Meltan, for whatever stupid reason, isn't a legendary but is still a mythical, he's still a mythical! That's still pretty impressive that Ash has called a mythical. Since we're on the topic of legendaries, I often see the argument of how Ash meets pretty much every legendary Pokemon but never catches them, and it's probably the dumbest argument ever. He meets these Pokemon in the movies, and none of the movies are canon, meaning Ash has never actually met them in the series. I have a debunk for why he doesn't catch the really strong Pokemon that appear in the show, but that's discussed later in the video. And since this next part doesn't fit into that section of the script, I'll just say it here. The Pokemon slogan is only "Gotta catch 'em all" in English. In Japan, it's Pokemon Gettoraze, which means get Pokemon, and there is no emphasis in Japan on catching them all, and that's not Ash's goal. Also, in regards to Ash's Pokemon, I often see the argument that he, quote, releases all of his good Pokemon, and it's so memed at this point that people actually believe that he does this religiously, when in fact he doesn't. The only Pokemon that Ash has officially released are Butterfree, Pidgeot, Lapras, Greninja, Goodra, and Poipole. That's only 6 Pokemon, only 2 of which were any good in battle, and there's even a 5-generation gap between Lapras and Greninja, so he didn't release any Pokemon for a good while. Greninja's release, I agree, it was kinda stupid, and I see why people are bummed about Goodra. You know, he lost some powerhouses there, not gonna lie, but he's really not missing anything by releasing the others. Butterfree wasn't around for very long, so we never really got to see its true potential, and battling didn't seem to really be its forte anyways, since he left to go get laid the first chance he got. Pidgeot and Lapras never won a single battle while they were with Ash, so they aren't much help, and Poipole isn't that strong for a first stage Ultra Beast. Just because Pokemon like Pidgeot and Butterfree are fully evolved doesn't necessarily make them good, and the same goes for Poipole as a legendary. Even so, people always conveniently seem to forget that all of his major powerhouses, you know, the ones that actually matter, are still at Oak's lab. Sceptile, Snorlax, Crocodile, Infernape, Muk, Staraptor, Heracross, all are just waiting to be used, and even Charizard is a call away at Charcific Valley. They haven't been released, just chilling at Oak's lab. Granted, he doesn't use them, but we already discussed that. I don't know what show some of these people are watching where Ash is out here releasing his aces, but whatever it is, it ain't canon. And speaking of things that aren't canon, any line where Ash mentions his age isn't canon. If it's in the anime, it's usually a dub-only change and wasn't there in the original Japanese version, such as the gang's return of Viridian City. A common one that's used is where Ash says it's been a year since he first met Pikachu, implying that he is now 11 years old, but that line is from a Pikachu short, which aren't canon to the series. Like I said in part 1, his age doesn't matter anyways, because he's canonically 10. Anything else is headcanon. I also really hate this argument that Ash is reset back to day 1 every generation, where he apparently loses all the knowledge he's had from the past and it's like he's never been a trainer before. This is an argument from people who clearly haven't watched the show because he really doesn't reset every series. Sometimes he's dumbed down slightly, but it's not to show that he regressed, but it's so new kids can learn the basics. The original series transitioned into Advanced Generation and Advanced Generation into Diamond and Pearl, meaning we literally see Ash decide to go to the new region and then we see him go there. Nothing implies that he loses any knowledge or is a completely different character or it's a different universe or anything like that. It's the same. If anything, in Advanced Generation and Diamond and Pearl, Ash acts as a mentor in a way to May and Dawn respectively, where they're the newbies who need to be explained things and Ash knows all of it already. There's even an episode where Ash and Brock remember the Pokeathlon from their time in Johto, so they clearly remember the past. I think the reason people think he gets reset is because there was no clear transition from Diamond and Pearl to Black and White. It was just Diamond and Pearl ends, Black and White begins with nothing in between, but that doesn't mean he was reset. I talk a little bit later in the video about how Ash's stupidity in Black and White is often overblown by fans, but the show makes sure you know that Ash has other Pokemon and has been on other adventures, with Charizard's return and the opening showing all of his guys at Oak's lab. Black and White then transitions into X and Y the same way as Battle Frontier to Diamond and Pearl, but Ash makes no mention of his past journeys. But honestly, he didn't really need to, because nobody asked. Sun and Moon has Brock and Misty return as well as cameos from his older Pokemon, but nothing past Gen 3. But since we know Ash went directly from Hoenn to the Battle Frontier to Sinnoh and then Unova and Kalos sometime after that those Pokemon had to have been there too. People believe in the reset so hard that they actually believe Gens 1 through 4 are a different universe from the other gens, but that's quickly disproven by the special episodes where Brock meets Silent and later where Silent meets Clement, all of them mentioning Ash at some point, so the series are definitely sequential without a doubt. As much as some of you don't like to admit it, the entire show is continuous and takes place in the order that it airs. Ash has this knowledge from his previous adventures, but maybe he purposefully doesn't use it as a way to challenge himself, much like how he doesn't use older Pokemon, or kinda like how we in the real world would do a Nuzlocke challenge. For instance, he abandoned the counter shield technique after Diamond and Pearl, but maybe that's a strategy he'd rather leave in the past. Maybe he wants to win with the new strategies he learns in the new region. Nowhere does it imply that Ash forgot the technique, he just doesn't use it anymore, and you never know, maybe they'll bring it back someday. It's like when Goku learned how to go Super Saiyan and he stopped using the Kaioken, but eventually brought it back years later. From a writing perspective, they don't want Ash relying on old techniques that are generations old and that new fans probably won't understand. Do you really think that they want to take the time to explain the origin of the counter shield once per generation and then do that for any other new unique strategy they decide to use down the line? I doubt it. Sometimes it's just best for some things to remain unique to their own generation. Lastly, I wanted to touch on the issue of plot armor in the series and how people misuse this term. I see people calling all of Ash's major wins plot armor, but I don't think some of you know what plot armor is, and that's understandable considering how terms like this are overused to death and don't mean what they're supposed to mean anymore. What plot armor actually is where the main character can't be removed from the story until the end, so they have to find ways to let the character get minor wins whilst keeping them in the story for the big finale. It's not inherently a bad thing, because most shows or movies have plot armor to some degree. It's just that when it's done well, you can't really tell, but when it's bad, it's very noticeable. Ash does have plot armor in Pokemon, but it's usually not done in the big important battles like against his rivals in the leagues. Plot armor, when done poorly, can be shown in a number of ways. For instance, Ash has plot armor in the sense that Team Rocket always fails to catch Pikachu, but it's also a running gag, so that works to a certain degree, and it's understandable and it's acceptable. The most obvious example of this, and the one that best applies to Pokemon, is the hero using a power or ability they've never used before, was never teased before, is never explained in-universe afterwards, may or may not break the rules of the show, and literally comes out of nowhere. An example of this type of plot armor for Ash is Pikachu and Swellow's Thunder armor against Tate and Liza. It was out of nowhere, they didn't train for it, it was never really explained, at least not well, and it breaks a few of the anime's rules. Is it cool? Sure, I guess it was a cool moment, but it wasn't very well written. There was no build up to it, it was just the payoff, and it was a way for Ash to win without truly showing his skill as a trainer. In universe though, I suppose it does show that Ash can adapt to the situation pretty easily, but even so, that's a bit of a stretch, and it's still not very good writing. That's a prime example of Ash's plot armor in Pokemon, but I see people apply this term to him when it really doesn't belong, and the main one I've seen recently is Rowlet beating Decidueye in the Alola League. This ain't plot armor. A weak attempt at a fake out, yes, but plot armor, no. Ash and Rowlet trained before the battle to learn Feather Dance, and despite not fully learning it by the time the battle began, he used it successfully when he needed to the most, which is Hero's Journey 101, and that kind of writing is super common in anime specifically. The biggest point of contention for that battle was the fact that Nanu called it, but Hala contested that decision, and I won't deny that it was kind of stupid and pointless, and you could argue that Hala served as Ash's plot armor in this instance, but it makes perfect sense in universe, so I wouldn't count it as plot armor. Nanu has always been lazy, so he probably would have called it the first chance he got. Hala then explains that he has the authority to overrule his decision, so that's another in-universe explanation right there. They couldn't see Rowlet's face, so Nanu probably shouldn't have called it because he couldn't actually see if it was KO'd or not. It was a bad call, which happens in real-life sports all the time, like the constant flagging and debating in American football. Oh, but Charizard was asleep in Kanto, and that counted as a loss. Why is this any different for Rowlet? They asked stupidly. Charizard was unwilling to battle and was straight up being a dick to Ash, and you legally can't force a Pokemon to battle. It has to be willing, and Charizard straight up refused. Rowlet falling asleep is one of his defining characteristics, and he's done it in battle before. There's no rule against that, nor does that mean he wasn't willing to battle either. He was right back up and ready to keep battling, so there's not an issue here logistically in universe. Like I said, is it bad writing? Sure, it was a pretty lackluster attempt at a fake out loss, but it still makes sense in universe, and there was no plot armor or cheating involved. There are plenty of instances in the show where there are characters who have actual plot armor, such as a few of the trainers Ash loses to in the leagues, Tobias being a prime example, but you can't call plot armor in every instance you don't like. If Ash wins, people say he has plot armor, and if he loses, they'll say the other guy had plot armor, without taking any form of context into the situation. Ash has lost some stuff he probably should have won, and won some stuff he probably should have lost, but that unpredictability is what makes the show worth watching in my opinion, even if that unpredictability results in some really dumb moments. Like I said before, I know what I expect from the show, so I don't set my standards too high, and I end up enjoying it, despite its numerous flaws.
God, William!
Sir, that could take days to assess both of their power levels if we comb through the series.
Have fucking time for this, William!
Probably the biggest thing I was criticized for was how I stated that levels don't exist in the anime. I still stand by this, despite what you might have seen. My main argument using Ash as Bulbasaur was admittedly the worst possible way I could have proved that, but I didn't want to spend too much time on levels in the anime in the original video because I assumed most people understood that they don't matter or simply don't exist, but I'm ready to go in depth today. I'm well aware that levels are mentioned in the anime as numbers, but it was really only one time ever. In episode 9 of the original series, The School of Hard Knocks, Character of the Week Joe tells Ash about the Pidgey line, including what levels they evolve and learn certain moves, and the other Character of the Week, Giselle, also points out how Ash's Pikachu should be, quote, around level 25 by now. I was well aware of this episode going into part 1, I even used a screenshot of it in that video, so I knew going into it that levels are mentioned as numbers, but I decided to disregard it because of a few factors which I'll now get into. Firstly, for the out-of-universe explanation, this mention of levels was a one-time occurrence. This is the only episode in which levels are referred to as numbers, and 20 years later, they've never been mentioned again. One instance of them being mentioned doesn't make them canon, because every other episode completely disregards this, and the show doesn't mention levels in this way ever again. The writing staff clearly hasn't taken levels into account or even treated them as a real thing in ages, so if they don't care about what they said in that episode, assuming it's even the same people who wrote it, then we shouldn't care either. And even if they were canon in the beginning, they clearly aren't anymore because nobody in universe mentions them or takes them seriously. Since levels are pretty important to a Pokemon's overall strength, you'd think that all these trainers who want to get stronger, like Gladian, Hao, Kiawe, Clement, Silent, and even Ash himself would care about levels or reference them in some way, but they don't. because levels don't exist. We never see a Pokemon level up, so how does one know what that looks like? When Ash's or his friend's Pokemon evolve or learn a new move, they make no mention of what level it's reached or that it even leveled up at all. If levels existed, then they would be mentioned significantly more often past an episode that was only made to pay tribute to the games in the first place. Narratively speaking, this is done because levels and numbers are restrictive when trying to write an interesting story. If Pikachu is level 100 like everyone likes to claim, then they'd have to write him out of certain situations so Ash doesn't just sweep everybody, and seeing that every episode would be really boring. By adding levels, they make writing the show 10 times harder on themselves because now when they match two Pokemon up, they have to take their levels into account, and if the numbers are off, then fans are going to get mad, and there's a lot of interesting matchups that they can't do because of power gaps. It's just so much easier to write cool battles first, think about the game mechanics never. As for the in-universe explanation, in the School of Hard Knocks, the character Joe and the rest of the trainers at the Pokemon School use simulations to gauge a Pokemon's level, which seems to be the only way to do so. It's not entirely out of the question that these simulations are the only thing they know about Pokemon battling, because Joe even says that the teachers don't care and they clearly don't have much real battle experience, as Ash and Misty both win against odds where they should have lost. Starmie and Pikachu had the type advantage against Weepinbell and Cubone respectively, but they prove that actual battle experience and skill as a trainer trump type advantages and any numbers you could possibly apply, including levels. The point of the episode was that you shouldn't rely on arbitrary numbers when it comes to raising Pokemon, because unlike the simulations in their universe or the video games for us, Pokemon aren't just data and numbers. My argument is that these kids only think levels exist because of the simulations they use and not from actual experience where that stuff can't be quantified. In the Pokemon world, Pokemon are living, breathing creatures with personalities and skills that you can't really apply numbers to. Looking at a Pikachu and claiming it's level 25 would be like looking at a dog and claiming it's level 10. It's just an arbitrary number that doesn't mean anything in the long run because you can't quantify it or prove what that number means. The concept of levels exists in the anime and are used in these simulations, but levels themselves don't exist in nature because they can't be quantified in any meaningful way. Levels exist in the games only for the player to gauge how powerful their Pokemon are getting and how difficult their opponent is. It's there to present progression and difficulty in a way that any new player can understand. Look, my number is bigger than that guy's number, I win. Or, his number is bigger than my number, so I'll probably lose. It's to show difficulty in a way that makes sense across any language or culture. Plus, the games are stat-based, so with even more numbers, a numerical leveling system is just intuitive. The anime, however, is not like this. The anime is not based on the games, like many people will lead you to believe, but rather it's based on the world and lore the games present. It's not based on the games, it's based on the Pokemon world itself, and as a result, is a different interpretation of it. When Ash battles, he doesn't see his Pokemon's health bar, nor can he just press B to stop his Pokemon from evolving. He literally lives in the Pokemon world. He's not controlling a video game character, nor is he living in a video game. The anime has no obligation to adapt everything in the games verbatim. So long as they hit the major story beats of each generation in some way, they're fine. They do take some stuff from the games, but not everything, because they pick and choose what they want, because some things work in a serialized story, some do not. Some only work in video games, so they can't use them in the show. To summarize this entire section, levels may have been canon in the beginning, but since the people writing the show don't need or care about them anymore, then they've effectively removed them from canon by not using them or treating them as a real thing in over 20 years. In-universe, levels are something that exist only in Pokemon battle simulations and not in nature, but the denizens of the Pokemon world, specifically the kids at the Pokemon School, think that they are real because they don't have any experience battling or raising Pokemon outside of these simulations. So one thing from part 1 that I got wrong was part of the Latios explanation. I claimed that both Latios and Pikachu were both weakened from the battle before, but I wrote that from memory and it turns out neither of them took any damage the whole battle. In this video, I was gonna argue that Latios was slightly tired from his battles with Sceptile and Swellow because stamina has bearing over a Pokemon's ability to keep battling in the anime, but I'm not gonna do that. If anything, the fact that they're both at full power makes this feat all the more impressive for Pikachu. The thing is though, Pikachu is only as powerful as he needs to be in a given situation, and this is true both in-universe and in the writer's room. Pikachu has beaten many strong Pokemon in his day, including pseudo-legendaries like Drake's Dragonite in the Orange League, actual legendaries like Brandon's Regice in the Battle Frontier, and Mega Evolutions like Karina's Mega Lucario. He's even battled against Mythicals like Zeraora in Sun and Moon, though he lost that one. However, he's also lost against stuff he really shouldn't have lost to, like a Bellsprout in the Kanto League, Paul's Elekid a few times, and even Team Rocket's Wobbuffet beat him once or twice. The difference is that Pikachu gets more powerful when the stakes are at the highest. He's at base strength in most random battles in any given episode, which isn't as strong as you think, but against gym leaders in league tournaments and against other strong trainers where Ash's goals are at stake, his power increases to meet the demand, kinda like adrenaline. In most instances where Pikachu beats a super strong Pokemon, he's usually fighting to win, not just for fun like he would in any other battle. Latios was no different because he needed to beat Tobias to win the Sinnoh League to fulfill his goal, but ultimately Pikachu and Latios were too evenly matched. Again, Pikachu is only as strong as the story needs him to be at any given moment. He's pretty basic when he's fighting for fun, but can get pretty strong when losing would actually matter, such as a league or other tournament. When writing for Pikachu, the writers are kind of in a weird situation because they need to show that Pikachu is strong, but not too strong so as to keep the pacing steady. Obviously, they've taken a few missteps here and there. Just look at the first episodes of any new generation. It's a writing flaw, yes, but it's one that has to be there so that things don't get too out of hand. Pikachu has been with Ash since day one and has never left his team, while his other Pokemon would later be dropped off at Oak's Lab, so it would make logical sense that he'd be Ash's strongest Pokemon in any given instance, but they can't have that because any early trainers would get murked and there'd be no tension. Pikachu's inconsistent strength is a prime example of poor writing, but it's kind of a necessary evil so the show doesn't get boring and they don't have to write Pikachu out of every situation so that the solution isn't always a thunderbolt away.
The power levels don't make sense! The power levels don't make sense!
Probably the biggest point of contention from part 1 was my explanation of the Snivy battle. Despite all the evidence as to why Snivy won, some of y'all seriously just won't accept it, so let me explain this as in-depth as humanly possible. So we all know that Pikachu didn't have Thunderbolt or Volt Tackle during this battle because of what Zekrom did at the start of the episode. We could all agree that that did in fact happen. To some of you, this isn't a valid excuse, and the argument is that Quick Attack and Iron Tail should have been enough to win with all of Ash and Pikachu's previous battle experience. The problem with that is that Pikachu was not 100%, and not just because of his moves. He was clearly physically weakened by Zekrom's Lightning Strike, and we can see this when Ash tries to call out electric attacks. Pikachu tries to use them, but starts breathing heavily and sweating, and he gets very tired very quickly, when he's definitely lasted much longer in battle in the past. Trying and failing to use these attacks clearly gassed him because he usually has way more stamina than that. The attacks didn't work because of some kind of electricity overload, and a similar thing happened in Hoenn. Perhaps Zekrom's Lightning Strike caused the same thing, and his inability to use attacks is just an early symptom. When Pikachu has too much or too little electricity in its system, it affects its health. That much is apparent when you look at some of Pikachu's Pokedex entries and Advanced Generation Episode 1. Point is, whatever Zekrom's Lightning Strike did, it sapped a lot of Pikachu's energy and stamina, causing his lackluster performance in this battle. Pikachu's power aside, Ash was also caught off guard a few times during that battle, and Trip was playing some major mind games. The first thing that threw him off was realizing that Pikachu couldn't use electric moves. He was immediately confused and tried multiple times to use Thunderbolt and Volt Tackle, but once he figured it out, he attempted to adjust his battle style accordingly. During this is when the mind games begin, when Trip taunts Ash for calling out moves he can't use, and Ash obviously gets a little frustrated at this and it throws him off a little. When Trip tells Snivy to use Leaf Tornado, Ash is immediately put in a bad situation because that's a move he's never seen before and therefore doesn't know how to react to. He was so taken aback that he doesn't even call for Pikachu to do anything. The reason he didn't get serious in this battle is because as soon as he overcame one bout of confusion and decided to get serious, he went right back into another bout of confusion because something else happened. The old 1-2 punch, as it were. And like I said in part 1, it doesn't matter that this was Trip and Snivy's first battle, because Trip clearly knew what he was doing and has some idea of how Pokemon battles work. Just because it was his first day as a trainer doesn't mean he's clueless. We even find out later in the series that Trip was a big fan of Alder, so he definitely knew how Pokemon battles work. We also don't know how much time has passed since Ash returned to Pallet Town from Sinnoh, so depending on how long it was between the last episode of Diamond and Pearl and the first episode of Black and White in-universe, then Pikachu could have been out of practice because it hasn't had a serious battle in a while, but that last part is just a conjecture. Plus, the battle was just for fun, so there wouldn't have been any consequences for Ash if he lost other than Trip not respecting him, so he probably didn't care that much. And this battle just further proves that levels don't exist, and I will continue to rub that in. Hypothetically, if Pikachu was level 100 and Snivy a level 5, and we're applying game mechanics to the anime, then one Leaf Tornado from Snivy would do less than 1% damage to Pikachu. And in the same strength, one Quick Attack would OHKO Snivy. If you don't believe me, run the damage calcs for yourself. Clearly, this is not what happened, because Snivy took a Quick Attack relatively well, and all it took to KO Pikachu was a Tackle and a Leaf Tornado. The only way that this would make sense is if levels aren't a thing, which I've already proven that they're not. That's not evidence of Ash being a bad trainer either, because if you're applying levels, then he wouldn't even need to command Pikachu to do anything, because it'd take over 1,000 Leaf Tornadoes to take him out, and any one attack would do the job. Ash could have literally done nothing and still won, if levels existed and game mechanics are applied. But like I've been saying, this is the anime, and levels don't exist. Black and White in general is a huge point of debate because people complain that Ash is borderline brain dead in that series and was pretty much reset to day one, but to anyone who's watched it past a few episodes and uses their brain just a little bit, knows that this isn't the case. He remembers his old journeys and basic things about Pokemon battling, he just makes some serious lapses in judgment, which he's done before, even in some of the best series. Even when he does make dumb decisions, such as sending in Oshawott against Pansage, he usually has a reason for it. In that instance, it was because Oshawott's Scout Chop could be used to deflect grass attacks, or in his battle against Ramos's Go-Goat, Frogadier was sent out because of Aerial Ace despite the type disadvantage. Those were genuine strategies, they're just a bit unorthodox, but we should be used to that by now because Ash has always had unorthodox strategies like that. Sure, sometimes there's no real excuse for why he does dumb things, but he does them in every series, and it's not just exclusive to Black and White. It's just more apparent in Black and White because everything was dumbed down a bit, not just Ash. They re-explained a lot of basic things in that series for the audience, and that's because of the commonly known fact that Gen 5 was meant as a soft reboot for the franchise. Ash forgets basic things all the time, and have you ever considered that he might just need to refresh his memory, like using the Dex on Coughing in Black and White for example? He didn't even say, "Who's that Pokemon?" like usual, or say its name confusingly when he did it. He just pulled it out, probably to refresh his memory because it's been a fat minute since he's seen a Coughing, let alone one in Unova. He was the only main character with a Pokedex in that scene, so Iris or Silent couldn't do it. Another example is his battle with Elisa where he relies only on Palpitoad. People say that that's more of him being excessively dumb, but I'd say it's the opposite. He thought up a strategy for the gym, took type advantage into account, and was confident enough to go through with his plan of only bringing one Pokemon, and that's certainly more thought out than just winging it. I'm sure we've all done that at the games at some point, where you go into a gym battle thinking one Pokemon will sweep, but ends up getting KO'd the first turn, so you gotta rely on the rest of your Pokemon that aren't fully equipped for it. I know that it's certainly happened to me before. Not in the same way as Ash, where I only bring one. I bring the whole team, obviously, but sometimes your ace gets taken out really easily, and you have to rely on the rest of them. Plus, the episode was supposed to be funny. It's a joke. You can laugh. It doesn't have to be serious all the time. Not laughing at this obvious joke is like not laughing at a fart joke because you think you're above it. Look, I'm not saying Black and White was great or anything. It's still the worst generation for the anime, but people significantly overblow Ash's stupidity. He's always been a little dumb. Even in Diamond and Pearl or XYZ, just a little more so in Black and White because they decided to accentuate that trait for comedic effect. They realized that people didn't like it, and post-Unova League, they do make efforts to fix him. And when X and Y came around, they had a fresh start to make him more well-rounded again. And just to make things clear, I'm not going to excuse the fact that there was a lot of very poor writing in Black and White. Some episodes of that series were unbearable to watch, but you can't claim that Ash is brain dead when it's only done in a handful of instances and in every series anyways. I seriously don't understand how people can feel genuinely insulted by a TV show, let alone one made for children for the sole purpose of selling merchandise. Like, I seriously can't fathom how you can feel like the show purposefully gave you the middle finger, but that's what the Kalos League finals were for a lot of people. People seriously still won't accept that Ash lost this. It's been like 3 years. Calm down, that's pathetic. Apparently, what I said in part 1 didn't mean anything to you people, so I'll quickly reiterate. Mega Charizard X was way more powerful than Ash Greninja because he's had more practice in the form. Ash and Greninja only learned to control that form 4 episodes before the league began, so they didn't have nearly enough time to train with it mastered where they can control it. Like I said in part 1, they can control Ash Greninja, but that doesn't mean it's any stronger than when it wasn't controlled, and they probably still had a ways to go. Additionally, Alon's Charizard had way more time to train and get used to its Mega Evolved form. In the Mega Evolution specials, it's shown that Charizard has beaten other strong Mega Evolved Pokemon, including an Absol, a Garchomp, and beat 9 other Mega Evolved Pokemon in a row with no rests. That is impressive, and I guarantee you Ash Greninja couldn't do that, even in its mastered form. One big argument is that in the final clash of the battle, Greninja's Water Shuriken was super effective against Charizard and should have KO'd, and this is simply untrue. Since Mega Charizard X is Fire Dragon, it loses its water weakness and water becomes neutral effective. That's not to say that this Water Shuriken didn't do any significant damage. I mean, it clearly did, just look at it. But it didn't do as much as people think. If it were super effective, I'm sure it would have KO'd, but it wasn't, so it didn't. It was definitely close to taking it out. Charizard even has trouble standing after getting hit by it, but in the end, Ash and Greninja just didn't have what it takes. In the same strength, people like to make the argument that since Blast Burn would be not very effective against Greninja, that it shouldn't have KO'd, and again, if you think this through, it definitely can. Blast Burn is literally the strongest fire-type move there is, and Greninja isn't a very defensive Pokemon. Strong move plus low defenses equals decent damage, even if it is resisted. Thinking that a resistant move can't KO a Pokemon is kinda grasping for straws. Yes, the neutral effective move is more likely to beat a Pokemon than a resisted move, but that doesn't mean that the latter can't happen. Plus, they had been battling for a while and were both very tired and had taken a lot of damage at this point, so any large amount of damage would have been enough to take either of them out. It's just that Charizard held out longer because it's had more training against strong opponents. Since everyone likes to blame the writing staff for this, it's actually been revealed in interviews that they wanted to let Ash beat Alola in this battle, but for one reason or another, whether that be corporate meddling, some kind of time crunch issue, or what have you, they didn't go through with it. Honestly, I think that they thought about doing it, but backed out at the last minute because they knew people would get mad and thought it'd be funny, and I can't say I blame them because it still is pretty funny to this day seeing people get mad about it. That's what you get when you set your standards too high, you fools. So, where does that leave us? I've explained all these misconceptions to the best of my ability, and hopefully you can at least understand the logic of each situation, both in-universe and in the writer's room, but these things don't really bring us to a definitive conclusion. Well, they actually do, and it all circles back to the title of this video. Ash is a good trainer. It's easy for us to call Ash a bad trainer because for us in the real world who can only raise Pokemon through the video games, a Pokemon can be bred with perfect IVs, EV trained, and brought to level 100 within a matter of hours, and it takes a day or two to beat any given game, assuming you take your time. Even without all that, it's not all that difficult for us as players to raise a powerful Pokemon and beat any in-game trainer. We as fans of the series living in the real world know all there is to know about Pokemon, like natures and type advantages and all that kind of meta stuff, and we have known these things for a long time. The point is, we have a predefined idea for how Pokemon should be trained for those who care about power and strength and nothing else. Ash isn't like that. He wants to get stronger, but he wants to do it on his own terms and in a way that's best for his Pokemon. And that's obvious to anyone who's watched the show for any amount of time. Just because Ash doesn't adhere to your preconceived notions of how a real trainer trains Pokemon, it doesn't make him bad. Unlike the games, there is more than one way to achieving strength in the anime. Trainers like Paul only want raw power. Others think evolution is the key, while trainers like Ash and his friends raise their Pokemon with care and affection. That's not to say he doesn't care about strength, because we do often see him train with his Pokemon, but the difference between him and, say, Paul or any other trainer who only cares about winning is that Ash's Pokemon are his friends, not tools for victory like you all seem to think of them as. Like I said earlier in the video, Pokemon are living beings, and Ash treats them as such. Strength and power are part of his goal, but those things mean nothing if those Pokemon aren't your friends. That's not to say he can't do both, but different Pokemon find happiness in different things. Some want to evolve and get stronger, others want to prove that they don't need to do that to be strong, and others are just happy the way they are. He doesn't catch every Pokemon he sees in the wild because they clearly don't want to be caught and are happy where they are. He loves all Pokemon and wants them all to be happy. It's the ones that choose him that he catches and travels with. And when he releases them, it's not because he wants to, it's because he needs to for the Pokemon to be truly happy. Out of universe, it's for power scaling, but you get the idea, don't ruin my emotional speech. If being a compassionate trainer is wrong, then he doesn't want to be right. People calling Ash bad for this is a textbook example of confusing his kindness for weakness. The point of this 2-paragraph long rant is this. Just because Ash doesn't live up to the standards of the Pokemon games doesn't mean he's a bad trainer. We give him a lot of flack in the community for losing league after league and losing to new trainers, but in all that negativity, we seem to forget all the great and impressive battles Ash has won over our years watching, and not even due to ass pulls. Y'all act like he loses horribly every episode, but he tends to win most of the time, and people only call him trash because he doesn't win entire regional tournaments with ease. He's won some intense battles all on his own, like against Gary, Paul, Drake, Brandon, Wolfric, Karina, Lieutenant Surge, Sawyer, Nolan's, Blaine, his long-awaited rematch with Misty and Sun and Moon, his tie with Maylene, Pikachu and Swallow's Thunder Armor against Tate and Liza was stupid, but fun and creative, and beating Trip's Superior was a great callback and resolution to the battle that annoyed so many. Heck, even when he loses these intense battles, he does so with dignity, like against Harrison, and even the ones where people hate the outcome, like Tobias and Alan, you can't deny that there were some great battles that were fun to watch, were beautifully animated, and showed the true power and skill of two great trainers. It seems that all that matters to some people is Ash's league placement, but with the exception of Kanto, where he literally got lucky, he doesn't get top 8 or better consistently by being a bad trainer. Even in seeded tournaments, where Ash is likely set up to lose early on, he still wins, and you can't chalk that up to luck if it happens as frequently as it does. If Ash were truly a bad trainer, as people like to say he is, then he wouldn't make it past the preliminaries in most regional tournaments, where there's hundreds of participants. He is more than just the sum of his L's. It's easy to look at his league placements and think, oh, I could do better than that, and call him trash without even watching the show, but those who do watch the show regularly, and truly understand who Ash is as a character and as a person, and have seen his battle skills change and develop over time, will tell you just how good of a trainer he really is. Is he bad by video game standards? Sure, I'll concede to that. He wouldn't hold a candle to Red, but by the anime standards, he's above average, and I'd say that makes him at least a little decent, don't you think? That's all I have to say on this matter. If you still think I'm wrong, feel free to disprove me because I know I'm right. That's all for this video. I've been MattCMG. I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.
Yo!